Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Midweek Mindset. So let me ask you a question. What if you had prayed for something and prayed for something and God placed in your life what was the most special thing that you have in this world? The thing that means more to you than anything. And then God said, okay, I'm going to need that back now. And you're like, but you promised and you gave me this and what? Yeah, that's kind of the deal this week, right? We've been going through Hebrews chapter 11 and looking at the heroes of faith. We've looked at Abraham before, and we're going to look at another aspect in Abraham's life, another event that happens. And you know the story that we looked at a few weeks ago. God had promised Abraham that he would have descendants greater than the number of grains of sand upon the shore of the sea, right? And he promised him this, and yet Abraham's 90 years old, and his wife Sarah is 80 years old. And then God blesses them with his son, Isaac. And so God does a thing only God can do in blessing them with his son at this age. And Abraham goes, okay, God has promised me this. He's promised, and this is their cherished thing, this son that they've been given. And then God comes along and says, hey, I need you to go sacrifice Isaac. And it's like, what? Hey, hang on here. Okay, so in verse 17, Hebrews 11, by faith Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had received the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. Abraham reasoned that God could raise the dead, and figuratively speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. Moses gave us a great picture of how long he was faithful in the 120 years of building the ark and all the stuff. Well, Abraham shows us not the length of faith maybe, but the depth. The depth of faith. Do you really believe God for what he promises? Do we believe God? Abraham has waited all these years. God has made this covenant with him, promised him this, that he would be the father of many nations and all these descendants and all this stuff that was going to happen. And it says it's going to be through Isaac. And then he says, take Isaac and sacrifice him. Go build an altar and sacrifice. And we know the story that Abraham got there and Isaac's like, hey, where's the sacrifice? And then he places him on the altar to sacrifice him. And then over in the thicket, all of a sudden, there's a ram to sacrifice. But Abraham is ready for this. Not only Abraham is ready for this, Isaac is ready for this. Think about this. The father is going to sacrifice the son. And the son is willingly going along with that. Does that sound familiar? Our Father in heaven willingly was going to sacrifice and did sacrifice his son for our sin. And the son willingly obeyed the Father. And we see that great picture here. And that picture of obedience, that picture of faith that is shown in this passage of Scripture. So the question is, what are you willing to believe God for? It says that Abraham knew God's promise, and God is faithful and keeps his promises, and Abraham knew that. So Abraham, it says, even thought, well, God can do whatever he wants to do, and so I'm going to obey him because he told me to do this, and he's going to raise Isaac from the dead because my descendants are to come through Isaac, and so that's got to be it. He doesn't have any children yet, so I've got to sacrifice him. God's got to raise him from the dead because I believe God that much, that God will be faithful in his word, and I believe God that much that he told me to do this, so I'm going to do this. Sometimes we get tired of waiting and praying or making steps of sacrifice in things in life, after a few days, a couple of weeks, something doesn't come through like we think it ought to, and the timing that we think it ought to, and we say, oh, this is, you know, this is crazy, and we walk away from that effort. What are you willing to give up? How much are you willing to believe God? How much faith? How deep is your faith? That's the question to ask yourself this week. Have a great week. Thanks.